Welcome back. As you know, I'm Eli, the computer guy, here for the Daily Blob, where we say, if a startup company is worth $1 billion, that's called a unicorn. If it's worth $10 billion, it's a decacorn. What would a startup worth $1 trillion be? I think it would be called a fucking stupicorn. A fucking stupicorn. Trademarked by Eli, the computer guy. But it appears, we are going to be seeing our first fucking stupicorn pretty goddamn soon. And I don't think it bodes well for any of us, to be frank. So I think this is kind of an interesting thing. We talk about startups and the valuation of startups. So back in the day, like during the 1990s, the concept is that most startups were supposed to IPO, basically have their shares listed on the American Stock Exchange relatively quickly, somewhere between 5 to 10 years, generally worth, a few $100 million. And the idea was, there was two ideas there. One is if you're selling your stock on the open market, is a lot easier to get more and more investors because basically anybody can buy shares in your company. And then two, it shows you the quote unquote like the real value of your company, right? If you have billions of people on the planet who are able to buy stock in your company, actually seeing the liquidity, actually seeing the volume of buy and sell orders can give you a relatively good idea of what your company is quote unquote actually worth, right? I've talked about this before. I had to deal with some old white guys many years ago. It was hilarious. It's hilarious. Oh, setting an Aspie loose amongst the old white guys still brings a smile to my face. Anyway, so there was a while there I was trying to figure out money. Like figure out money. Not like money, I was like figure it out, right? Anyways, it came to that whole value. Like what is the value of a thing? How do you know what the value of a stock is or a bar of gold or whatever else? And so I'm sitting there, this old white guy is about losing his goddamn mind. And finally he looked at me and was like, look, Eli, all it is. Because I was like, is it a basket? Is it a basket of currencies, right? So if you're looking at this stock in the United States, do you compare that against the value of the euro and the won and the renminbi? And based off of that mathematical translation, that means that AT&T should be worth $120 a share. Anyways, so I was like, He's like, look, Eli, here's the deal. You only know the value of a thing at the exact moment a transaction occurs, right? So the moment you hand over a resource and they hand you over basically cash, at that moment in time, you know the exact value of that resource, right? And so like when you sell a house, right? You don't really know the value of your house until you sell the house. Is our house worth $800,000? Is it worth $200,000? Is it worth $758,000 or maybe $757,000? And so the issue is like with housing is you never really know, right? You own a house generally for a number of years. And so the volume of housing sales for your house is relatively small. So you have an idea of what you think your house is worth, but until the actual transaction occurs, who the hell knows? All right, so one of the ideas with IPOing, getting your stock out there on the real stock market, is that you can get the volume, right? If people are buying and selling millions of shares a day, you only know the value of a share at the exact moment the transaction occurs. But if you have millions of transactions occurring during the day, you get a pretty good idea of what the consensus value of that stock is. Right, and so that was the idea. Like, what is the consensus value of the stock? Be able to get money from the public market, so on and so forth. Right, with the latest boom over the past 10 or 15 years of startup companies, though, we've seen more and more of the private investment, and the private investment just going to idiotic lengths. Right, we saw this with WeWork. The idea, there was still a private company. They were going to IPO at $49 billion. Right, you saw this with Uber. Right, they were still a private company. They were going to IPO at $120 billion. They didn't. Neither of them did. But that was the idea, right? And basically what we're starting to see is more and more of these companies, what they found is it's easier to get private investor money than it is to get onto the public markets. And so Basically, they're just sucking up this private investor money. The issue, though, with that is you have fewer people trying to figure out what the true value of these companies actually are, right? If you have 1 million people a day doing transactions, then you get a pretty good idea of what the consensus is. What happens when you have these private rounds? And these private rounds might have 5 or 10 investors. Basically, that's just what 5 or 10 investors believe. Not only that, you get the stupidity of SoftBank and their goddamn vision fund, that shit show. Anyways, you have SoftBank come in, and they'll just lead multiple rounds. Now, that was the problem with WeWork. So whenever there's a round, one investor or investor group is supposed to lead the round. Basically, they put in the most money of that round, and then everybody else basically follows on with that, right? So I'm going to put in $2 billion, and then Bob is going to put in $1 billion, and Steve is going to put $500 million, right? But the idea is you shouldn't lead multiple rounds. So let's say you lead this round. Next round, right? They get to the end of the runway. They need a new round of funding. Then Bob should lead that round. Is Bob comfortable putting his $2 billion down? And then the next round is going to be led by Sue, right? So the idea is that these different rounds are led by different investors to verify, it's still horseshoes and hand grenades and startup world, but right, that there's some kind of vague consensus. The problem is you get it with like SoftBank, right? That's such a shit show. They just lead multiple fucking rounds because they believe it's worth it, right? We're going to lead for $5 billion. We're going to lead for $10 billion. We're going to lead for even more money. And they don't give a damn what anybody else thinks. But remember, with investments, it's all what somebody else is willing to pay, right? You don't invest $1 to get $1 back. You invest $1 to get $10 back is the hope. Well, the problem is if like SoftBank is leading multiple rounds, they never actually allow anybody else to get in and say, we don't think the company's actually worth that much money, right? So we get a lot of stupidity in this world, especially in this private investment thing. And so that's why it becomes really interesting now with artificial intelligence and the stupidity going on with artificial intelligence. I talked about this in a previous video. Sam Altman wants to spend trillions of dollars just in data centers alone. We've got like $400 billion or whatever in CapEx expenses for AI companies this year alone. Right? There's just all of this money getting dumped into this AI idiocy, which becomes interesting when we look at OpenAI, and they are now trying to get a $500 billion valuation. A private company, private, not IPO'd, not on the public market, private company. And recently, it was only $300 billion, like in March. OpenAI in talks to sell around $6 billion in stock at roughly a $500 billion valuation. So a company that literally burns cash, a concept that I have to say day by day, I get more confused by. And they want a $500 billion valuation. And the thing to think about there for the investors is where is the spread? Where is the upside? If you're already saying that OpenAI is worth $500 billion, how do you get it to $1 trillion? So 10x of $500 billion, is $5 trillion. Do you see OpenAI being worth $5 trillion? OpenAI is preparing to sell around $6 billion in stock as part of a secondary sale that would value the company at roughly $500 billion. The shares would be sold by current and former employees to investors, including our favorite dipshit investors of the past fucking decade, SoftBank. Dear SoftBank, can you go the fuck away, please? SoftBank has been such a fucking disaster. Oh, anyways. So yeah. Oh, hey, yeah, SoftBank fucked up with WeWork, and they fucked up with Uber, and they fucked up with God knows how many other companies. But hey, don't worry. I'm sure their valuations for OpenAI are just going to be a game changer. Anyways, Dragoneer Investment Group, and Thrive Capital. OpenAI's valuation has grown exponentially since the AI startup launched its generative AI chatbot, ChatGPT, in 2022. The company announced a $40 billion funding round, I talked about that earlier, in March at a $300 billion valuation. So these jackasses seem to believe OpenAI has increased in value by $200 billion since March. By far the largest amount ever raised by a private tech company. Earlier this month, OpenAI announced its most recent $8.3 billion in fresh capital tied to that funding round. So, yeah, this is where we are in the AI world and why it's becoming ever less amusing by the day. Because you got to think about this, all right? OpenAI, they're trying to value that at $500 billion, up $200 billion in months, right? XAI, I think they're trying to say that horse crap is worth $150 billion. All of these companies, right, focused on all of these valuations based off of AI that are just going through the absolute roof. Like, I mean, just beyond. How does any of this make sense, right? I think about this like with Facebook, right? Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, they put a tremendous amount of money into VR, right? The metaverse. And that was dumb. What happened to the metaverse? I guess it's now a contract for the US military. Anyways, right? But he was putting like $10, $20 billion a year into the metaverse, right? And that was stupid, but that was meta. Like what I try to explain this is think about if Meta had put in tens of billions of dollars in the metaverse, and Apple, and Microsoft, and Cisco for some reason, and throw in a few other companies, right? If you were told they were investing $150 billion a year into the metaverse, no matter how you feel about VR, I think it would raise a lot of flags. Like that seems a little high. That seems a bit wonky. And that's my whole issue here when we start talking about OpenAI or any of these AI companies and the valuation. These valuations are so absurd. How can this ever make any sense? And that's for all the people out there. They're like, Eli, the computer guy, how do I get a job? I want you to understand, whatever economic kerfuffle we are currently in, it is going to get so much worse. It is going to get so much worse. I mean, this is just a bubble on steroids. And the thing is, with this idiotic bubble on steroids, it's not one company or two companies. Everybody has bought into this idiocy, right? It's not just SoftBank will fucking buy anything, right? You tell them you can figure out how to make poop, send poop on the blockchain. You can probably get $1 billion out of SoftBank, right? Fuck SoftBank. But here's the thing. With this, it's not just SoftBank. It's all of the investors. It's all of the companies. It's all of the politicians and government officials. It's so much of our society that's just bought in to this hysteria that when the bubble pops, I don't think it's going to be pretty. I don't think it's going to be a particular pretty thing. But anyways, I don't know. That's just my opinion. What do you think about this? What do you think about OpenAI trying to be valued at $500 billion? Do you think there is a basis in reality for this? When you hear this, are you like, oh, Eli, what you have to understand is, I don't know. Put your thoughts down below. Give us a thumbs up. Give us a thumbs down. Say I'm amazing. Say I'm an idiot. It's okay. It's YouTube. All that matters is that interaction. And with that, see y'all later.